Good afternoon, folks. My name is Jim Webner. I'm the meeting coordinator for Sandy Spring Friends meeting, and I want to welcome you to this presentation, Back from the Brink, a grassroots campaign for fundamental change in U.S. nuclear weapons policy. This discussion is co-sponsored by the Peace and Social Concerns Committees of Sandy Spring Friends meeting and the Baltimore Yearly Meeting Working Group on U.S. Militarism and War. Today's discussion will examine the current danger of a nuclear exchange, along with the myth of deterrence, as well as an overview of the growing grassroots Back from the Brink campaign, launched in 2017 to eliminate nuclear weapons. Today, we're joined by speakers Jean Athey and Danny Hall. Jean is clerk of the BYM Working Group on U.S. Militarism and War, and was co-founder of Prevent Nuclear War Maryland. She's also secretary of the Maryland Peace Action Board and convener of Baltimore Peace Action. From 2006 to 2019, Jean was coordinator of Peace Action Montgomery, and she has previously served on the National Board of Peace Action, including as co-chair for 2 years. Her past activities include a peace mission to Afghanistan in 2011, in collaboration with the Afghan Women's Fund, and volunteering with the International Solidarity Movement in Palestine for the olive harvest in October 2008. Sorry about that. Danny is Director of Public Affairs for Soka Gakkai International USA, the most diverse Buddhist community in the United States, with more than 500 chapters and some 100 centers throughout the country. Based in Washington, D.C., Danny helped organize the conference, Making a Difference, Faith Communities and the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons at the United States Institute of Peace in 2014. In 2017, he co-organized the conference Toward a Fundamental Change in Nuclear Weapons Policy at the United States Capitol Visitor Center. In March 2021, Danny co-organized a virtual policy briefing and workshop series entitled Eliminating Nuclear Weapons Before They Eliminate Us, Opportunities Under the Biden Administration to Take Action. He was a citizen lobbyist at the 2017 UN preparatory meetings for the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and his publications include the chapter Pope John Paul II, Radio Free Europe, and Faith Diplomacy in the book Religion and Public Diplomacy, published by Palgrave Macmillan. A few housekeeping matters before we begin. This event is being recorded and will be available for viewing at sandyspring.org/nuclear. and on Sandy Spring Friends' YouTube channel. Jean and Danny will speak for about half an hour and will then answer follow-up questions. Please type your questions for our speakers in the chat, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible. So thank you for joining us this afternoon, and I'll turn this over to Jean.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate the introduction, and also thanks to Ellen Atkinson for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to share my screen now. Let me see if I can do this. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to be speaking about the danger of nuclear weapons and what you can do. Let's see. Well, this worked before. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about the danger today, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the cost of nuclear weapons and modernization, so-called modernization, the ban treaty, and then some things that we must do. So many of you are probably familiar with the doomsday clock that is every year the time is set by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And what they are trying to do is show how close the world is to destruction by humanity. Right now, it is at 100 seconds to midnight, which is the closest to midnight it has ever been since they've had this clock from 1947. I went to hear former Secretary of Defense William Perry speak in 2017 at the Washington National Cathedral. And one of the things that he said is, nuclear weapons are the most serious and least understood problem facing the US. We are sleepwalking into a catastrophe. That was in 2017. And since that time, different things have happened, which make it likely that the risk is even greater than it was just a few years ago. For example, all except one of the nuclear weapons treaties have now expired, and that one, New START, is currently on life support. So there's no international treaties any longer. So August 1st of this year, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, the world is just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation. We've been extraordinarily lucky so far, but luck is not a strategy. But many people today seem to believe that, in fact, nuclear war is winnable, both military leaders and civilian leaders. Many of us used to think that nuclear weapons use was taboo, but it never has been. One use of nuclear weapons is to threaten other countries. And we know that between 1945 and 1996, at least 25 serious secret nuclear war threats were made by the US. We don't know past 1996 because that information is not available yet. It's classified. Daniel Ellsberg, who used to work for the RAND Corporation and also the Defense Department, has recently said that threatening nuclear war has been the procedure of every president since 1945, and that the declared official rationale to deter, he says, has always been a deliberate deception. I want to mention what's called the Nuclear Posture Review, which is a document that every administration puts out. So it comes out once every 4 years. And the one that came out under Trump had a whole series of actions that were laid out publicly as being cause for the US to use nuclear weapons first, including a cyber attack. This position statement was roundly criticized by many Democrats who said it was extraordinarily dangerous. The Biden administration has not yet put out anything. They have one, but it's unclassified, but it's classified, and so we don't get to see it. But still, Biden has changed virtually nothing with respect to Trump's foreign policy. We might get a clue about what the current US position with respect to nuclear weapons is by using a document called the Joint Chiefs Nuclear Operations Publication. This was signed off on by Mark Milley, who was then the Secretary of the Army in 2019, and now he's chief of the Joint Chiefs. And this statement, this document included this statement: a nuclear weapon could be brought into the campaign, that is a war, as a result of perceived failure in that war, potential loss of control, or, and this is the one that is astonishing to me, a nuclear weapon could be brought into it to escalate the conflict, to sue for peace on more favorable terms. That is apparently the position of the US government with respect to use of nuclear weapons. Now, we have thought that Trump was crazy, but he just said a lot of times, he said publicly what the foreign policy establishment has always said. And of course, that is crazy. Usually nuclear threats have been made privately by presidents, but not Trump. You may recall that he said North Korea will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen before he became buddy-buddy with Kim Jong-il. And that statement is very similar to the one that Putin made recently, where he said to countries that were tempted to interfere in Ukraine, they will face consequences such as you have never seen in your entire history. It's very similar to what Trump said. Actually, it's never been taboo to use nuclear weapons. We just thought it was. So that's one of the reasons why we have, despite advocating for this, we have been prevented from getting Congress to pass legislation saying that it is the policy of the US to never use nuclear weapons first. The United States wants to have that option. One of the ways that the military industrial complex uses to make nuclear weapons more acceptable to us is by calling them low yield tactical weapons. Tactical implies that they would just be used in a conventional war. And so, they wouldn't be any worse than any other bombs that we use. Low yield is designed to make people think that these weapons are small. They aren't. Many have as much destructive potential as the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The US deployed low yield nuclear weapons on submarine launched ballistic missiles in 2020. And Congress recently passed a bill to spend $65 billion for more low yield nuclear weapons for submarines. Now, when Putin invaded Ukraine in 2014, the US and its allies did a number of war games to find out what would happen if Putin thought that his regime was threatened. And they, just about all of these war games concluded that he would use a tactical nuclear weapon, that the US would retaliate by using a nuclear weapon, and most likely, more than likely, that would escalate to a larger use of nuclear weapons by both sides, all-out nuclear war. Within a few years, a few hours, 100 million casualties, and then radiation and nuclear winter. So Zia Mian, who is an anti-nuke activist, so he's a physicist at Princeton, he commented on August 4th, the US Strategic Command accepts publicly that all of their nuclear war exercises end in all-out global thermonuclear war. The war plans they have always end up with the end of the world. And yet, people continue to think that we can survive this. This is a screenshot from New York City's Emergency Management Agency for a PSA that they did in July. And so this woman comes on the screen and she says, so the big one drops, what do you do? And so she says, well, get inside and move away from windows, stay inside, take a shower, and then stay tuned, follow the media. It seems kind of like she's telling you how to survive a hurricane. And then as she walks away at the end, she says, you've got this. This is designed to make it seem that we can survive a nuclear war. There was a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed that was headlined, the US should show that it can win a nuclear war. But I want to tell you a little bit about a study that was published by Rutgers University in August. In fact, they just, they had a press conference on it on Monday. And so this has just been published. They asked two different questions, two very simple questions. What would be the consequences of a so-called limited nuclear war, say between India and Pakistan, or a large-scale nuclear war, say between the US and Russia? And what they found is that nuclear winter would kill most of humanity, that a nuclear war between any nuclear states would produce climate change that is unprecedented. For example, the US would, the world would cool some places as much as 40 degrees Fahrenheit almost immediately. And it would stay cold for a decade. A small nuclear war would mean that food production would be reduced dramatically and billions would be killed by famine. I'm going to show you a video now based on this study.
Scientists used to think that nuclear war would get us mainly via explosions, radioactive fallout, and electromagnetic pulse. But a nuclear winter could kill much more people. If the US and Russia go at it, black smoke could smother Earth for years, ruin farming so that most humans would starve to death. So what makes so much smoke? Why does it spread around the globe? How can it stay up for years? And how does it impact food production? I'm Max Tegmark, an MIT physics professor who's very curious about these questions. So let's explore them together. Some of the world's leading nuclear winter researchers kindly gave me gigabytes of their state-of-the-art simulation data so that I could make these visualizations of what happens. Here's the nuclear war between India and Pakistan, producing 47 megatons of black carbon smoke. The smoke isn't made by the nuclear explosions themselves, but by firestorms in large cities that have been ignited by nuclear airbursts. Like a campfire on steroids, a firestorm makes hot air and smoke rise up while sucking in cooler air from the sides. This creates storm-level winds fanning the flames, igniting anything that can burn, melting glass and some metals, and turning asphalt into flammable hot liquid. The Hiroshima bomb caused such a firestorm, and a large city like New Delhi, with over 100 times greater population, can create much more smoke in a firestorm, sending plumes up into the stratosphere, far above any rain clouds that would otherwise wash out the smoke. These simulations have also shown that the black smoke gets heated by sunlight, wafting it like a hot air balloon for up to a decade. In the meantime, Earth gets freezing cold even during the summer, with farmland from Kansas to the Ukraine cooling by about 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees centigrade, and other regions cooling almost twice as much. A new science paper estimates that a US-Russia war would starve over 5 billion people to death, including around 99% of those in the US, Russia, Europe, and China. Let's see what such a US-Russia war with 150 megatons of black carbon smoke would look like from space, from the direction of the sun. You see that the high latitude jet streams are so fast that it takes only a few days for the smoke to spread across much of the northern hemisphere. Before you get too excited about moving to Australia, the spoiler alert is that the smoke will eventually get there too. We obviously don't know how many people will survive a nuclear war, but I'm confident that if it's even remotely as bad as many scientists think, then many survivors will view it not as a failure of individual politicians or countries, but of humanity itself, letting our children down like never before. Please tell your friends about this video. I made it because the more people know about nuclear winter, the less likely it is that we'll create one.
No, I'm having trouble going. Like, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to talk about something different, and that is how much do nuclear weapons cost us? The costs of many military programs are well known, but the costs of nuclear weapons aren't. Sometimes Congress doesn't even know about it. It's very secretive, and the data isn't provided. But here's something that is an astonishing fact. In fact, the Brookings Institute did a study that they published in 1996. It took them 4 years to do this study because they took that long to get the data and to figure out how to divide it up and so forth. And they concluded that between 1940 and 1996, the US spent at least $8.9 trillion on nuclear weapons. That's in 2017 dollars. 8.9 trillion. No one has been able to do such a study since. So we don't know how much the US is spending on nuclear weapons now, although the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons has calculated that last year, the US spent over $84,000 per minute on nuclear weapons. So let's think about what a trillion is, since it's more than we can really conceive of. 1 trillion. Imagine that you spent $1 million a day, beginning with the birth of Jesus. To spend $1 trillion, you'd need to keep spending $1 million a day until midway through the 28th century. Or another way, if you laid out $1 trillion end to end in $100 bills, you could circle the earth at the equator 39 times. For 3% of $1 trillion, you could end starvation everywhere on earth. Here's another astonishing fact. Nuclear weapons are the US's third highest national budgetary priority ever. Military spending, excluding nukes, is first. Social Security second, although many people would feel that Social Security shouldn't be included here since the money comes from payroll taxes and is redistributed to older Americans or placed in a trust fund. And nuclear weapons. So nuclear weapons are either second or third, depending on how you want to categorize Social Security. And now we've entered into what is being called the modernizing of US nuclear weapons, where we're going to spend $2 trillion over 30 years. That's over and above what we normally spend. Now, modernizing sounds kind of like you're going to update your kitchen. That's not what they're talking about. This is the development of new weapon systems with new nuclear warheads. And by starting this, we have begun an engagement in a new arms race. And nuclear modernization was started under Obama. Here are some of the things that are included in US nuclear so-called modernization. 600 new ICBMs, a new sea-launched nuclear cruise missile, 100 new stealth air-launched nuclear missiles. So this is a major deal. Now, who benefits from the upgrade? Well, I'm sure most of you know. There are billions of dollars in corporate profit that are related to nuclear weapons. There's a new public citizen report that said that if the final 2023 budget is passed, contractors will have received nearly 450,000% return on their $10 million investment in Congress. Now here's a trade-off. Would you rather our government spend $1 trillion on new nuclear weapons or free college tuition for every qualified student for the next 16 years? I want to show you something called the Social Progress Index rankings for 2020. There's 54 indicators that are included in these rankings in the area of basic human needs, foundations of well-being, and other things. And so this organization, which is based at a university in the US, I forgot which one, they compile all this data and then they rank the countries. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that the United States is 28th among countries. We're right below Greece and Cyprus in terms of what we do for the people of our country. We're number one in military spending. We spend more on the military than the next 11 countries combined. We're number one by far in nuclear weapons spending, but we're number 28 in social progress. I want to turn now to talking about the ban treaty. Maybe you haven't heard of it. It's hardly been covered by the US media at all. Since Putin started talking about nuclear weapons in February, the media has mentioned nuclear weapons over 5,000 times, according to a search of Nexus. But only 43 of those times included even a mention of the treaty. So what is it? In July of 2017, 122 nations voted to adopt the treaty, and subsequently, many nations have ratified it. There are now 66 nations that have ratified the treaty. And so it is international law. Having nuclear weapons or using them is against international law. So why do we have this treaty? Why? What is it supposed to do? Well, like biological weapons and chemical weapons in the past, the goal is to ultimately to prohibit their use, to stigmatize, and ultimately to eliminate. So it's a key element in the strategy leading to the total elimination of nuclear weapons. It's designed to de-legitimize them. So we're building a new movement now, and one that is critical to us, to our children, and to most other species of life on Earth. You may remember that in the 1980s, there was a very strong nuclear movement, but we didn't finish it. We didn't totally eliminate them. There's now there are several pieces of legislation in Congress that are important. One is HRES 1185, which was embracing the goals and provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. There are only 7 co-sponsors, however, so far, and none of them are from Maryland. There is HR 669 and also S 1148. This bill, both the House and the Senate version, would prohibit the use of federal funds to conduct a first use strike unless Congress explicitly authorizes it. And for that bill, there are 8 co-sponsors, including Chris Van Hollen, and 43 House co-sponsors, including Raskin and Sarbanes. It'd be great if we could dramatically increase the number of co-sponsors for this. So what we have to do is to help build this movement so that we can ultimately eliminate nuclear weapons. Here are some things that you can do. Lobby for county and city council and also state legislature, General Assembly resolutions on nuclear weapons. Join Peace Action or Prevent Nuclear War in Maryland or other groups that are working to end nuclear weapons. Ask your religious congregation or civic organization to pass it back from the Brink resolution. That's something that Danny's going to describe in detail. Lobby members of Congress in person, question candidates for office. That's really important because candidates hardly ever get any questions from people about nuclear weapons or even foreign affairs. And so this would let them know that this is important to a number of people. You can share on social media. You could make or arrange a presentation or show a film. If anybody would like to have this PowerPoint that I've made, I would be more than happy to provide it for you. And you could edit it however you want. You could call Congress, write letters to the editor. I wrote a letter to the Washington Post about 3 weeks ago that got published. It's harder to get letters in the Post than it is in local papers. And here's something to think about, that if you write a letter to the editor and it's published, if you mention the name of your representative or your senator, they will know about it. They will know that this letter was published, they will see it, and they might even contact you. I've had that happen. But this particular letter that I wrote was in response to what I consider to be a terrible editorial about the New START treaty, where the editors of the Post were saying, well, this is an okay treaty, but it's not that important. That was basically what you came away with. So I was very pleased that they agreed to print it. Talk to friends and family. We have to talk one-on-one by people for them to begin to see how important this is. Here's a new word, omnicide. It means the total extinction of the human species as a result of human action. When a few years ago, when during the Iraq War, I was arrested, and my 4-year-old grandson, Lucas, found out about it, and he was very puzzled. Why was his beloved grandmother arrested? He thought it was only the bad guys who got arrested. So he's asking me about it. So I tried to explain to him what the Iraq War was, and in terms that he could understand. So after I finished, he said, "But Yaya, why don't the grown-ups do something? I think it's time for us to do something." The executive director of ICAN, International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, is Beatrice Finn. And in her Nobel Peace Prize lecture of 2017, she said, "The story of nuclear weapons will have an ending, and it is up to us what that ending will be. Will it be the end of nuclear weapons, or will it be the end of us? One of these things will happen." For more information, you can check out the websites of Peace Action, of Physicians for Social Responsibility. You can look at a nuke map, which shows where nuclear weapons could be dropped and what would happen. You can go to the ICAN website, the Arms Control Association. These are just a few places where you can get more information. I would highly recommend the book by Daniel Ellsberg that came out 2 or 3 years ago called The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner, and Almighty by Dan Sack. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jean. Yeah, that presentation was so comprehensive and informative. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Danny Hall. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for SGI-USA Buddhist Association based in Washington, D.C. I want to really thank our organizers for this event and for each of you attending. I also serve on the steering committee for the Back from the Brink campaign, a US-based grassroots coalition of individuals, organizations, and elected officials working together on a multi-year campaign to abolish nuclear weapons and to secure a set of common sense US nuclear weapons policies that will make the world safer, healthier, and more just. Right now, there is a tremendous opportunity to build, support, and make progress toward a world free of nuclear weapons. The public is paying attention, and they're concerned. The war in Ukraine has laid bare the truth that nuclear weapons don't make us safe, the folly of nuclear deterrence, and that it's well past time to get serious about abolishing them. But that won't happen unless the people demand it. So hopefully you'll come away from this presentation with ideas for more ways that you can make a difference in your community right now. So again, thank you for being here. The campaign was founded in the fall of 2017 by leaders from the Union of Concerned Scientists and Physicians for Social Responsibility as a vehicle to build broad public and congressional support for its policy platform, and to do it in a way that builds real political power by bringing people and communities together in common cause. Back from the Brink was also established as a collaborative effort designed to not be owned by any single individual or organization, and to provide a simple, scalable way that anyone, any activist, any organization, any elected official could engage their local community in a national campaign to help build political will for a fundamental change in US nuclear weapons policy. We know that members of Congress aren't going to make these policies a priority if their constituents don't demand it. Yet, even now, many people don't really know how dangerous, how expensive, how unjust or how harmful to health and the environment these weapons are. To change that, we have to talk about nuclear weapons to more people, to different people, to local communities, to local, state, and federal leaders, and Back from the Brink is an effective means to do just that. Back from the Brink's fundamental mission is to help achieve the complete elimination of all nuclear weapons. We call for the United States to lead multilateral negotiations among all nuclear weapon states to pave the way for the US to align and comply with the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The treaty, which entered into force in January of 2021, is a legal global prohibition on the development, possession, and use of nuclear weapons. Back from the Brink works to advance a comprehensive policy agenda, 5 common sense policy solutions that, if enacted, would reflect a fundamental change and reform of US nuclear weapons policy. We call on the United States to actively pursue a verifiable agreement among nuclear armed states to eliminate their nuclear arsenals, renounce the option of using nuclear weapons first, end the sole unchecked authority of any president to launch a nuclear attack, take US nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert, and cancel the plan to replace the entire US arsenal with enhanced weapons. Over 400 health, policy, faith, peace, environmental, climate, and justice groups have endorsed Back from the Brink to date, ranging from large national organizations to local grassroots groups that are at the core of Back from the Brink organizing. To date, 61 municipalities and 7 state legislative bodies have voted to adopt resolutions supporting Back from the Brink's policy platform, from small towns to major cities such as Baltimore, Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, Tucson, Washington, D.C., Boston, Minneapolis, as well as the state of California, the state of Oregon, the Maine Senate, and the New Jersey Assembly. If you visit the municipalities and states page on our website, each one of these seals links to the resolution that was adopted. All of the resolutions include support for Back from the Brink's 5 policy solutions, and activists often customize resolutions to make them more relevant and persuasive to their communities. Some also include support for divestment or making the city a nuclear weapons-free zone. These resolution efforts are most often led by local community members or organizations, including local chapters of PSR, Veterans for Peace, Pax Christi, and American Friends Service Committee. Individuals too have organized in their communities around resolution efforts. For example, one person herself, Sandra Yarn from Seacoast Peace Response, led 5 successful efforts in New Hampshire all by herself. Each resolution paves the way for the next, as municipalities can see that they are joining other towns and cities throughout the country and are part of a larger movement to abolish nuclear weapons and reform US nuclear weapons policy. And here's a screen grab from a resolution text that was adopted right here in Montgomery County, which endorsed Back from the Brink in 2019. And in fact, just yesterday, the city of Frederick, Maryland endorsed Back from the Brink. And a group of local activists have been actively working to adopt a resolution in Prince George's County by the end of the year. So there's a lot of action that people can get involved with right here in the local community. Most Back from the Brink resolutions include a call for the US to embrace the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which means these municipalities and states can join hundreds of cities worldwide that are part of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons cities appeal. We're proud that the majority of US cities that have joined ICANN cities appeal came through Back from the Brink resolutions. Back from the Brink has also been endorsed by over 320 local and state elected officials from across 41 states who signed an open letter to President Biden and members of Congress last September calling for bold action on nuclear weapons policy. These local and state leaders understand that nuclear weapons are a local issue in the same way that a global pandemic and the climate crisis are local issues, except there's no vaccines or adaptation strategies that will protect us from nuclear war. The only way to truly do that is to eliminate all nuclear weapons. Back from the Brink is proud of all we've accomplished over the past few years, but we also know that changing the nuclear status quo will require much more. And right now, this is an all hands on deck moment. As part of our efforts to build on our accomplishments and scale up our organizing, we've developed new ways for both organizations and individuals to engage with our coalition and campaign. One of my favorite things about Back from the Brink is that our power comes from the wide variety of folks who use their individual skills, networks, and interests to get involved in the way that works best for them. I'm going to highlight a variety of actions you can take right now to help get us closer to a world free of nuclear weapons. I'll share a link in the chat later on with all of this information that I'm about to mention. And there will be an opportunity to ask more questions when we're finished. So let's dive in. The bread and butter of our approach to local organizing is passing Back from the Brink resolutions in local, county, and state legislatures. Resolutions are an opportunity to educate the public and our decision makers about the problems and solutions of nuclear weapons. Gathering a group to pass a resolution is a discrete, meaningful way to organize locally. While each community is different, we have passed over 60 resolutions so far, and we have lots of resources, both people, physical, and digital, to help out in your efforts. One of the main activities involved with passing a resolution is contacting your officials at every level of government. Our decision makers need to hear from their constituents, whether you converse with them via email, phone, social media, or in person. Building connections to your officials is one of the best ways to leverage your power as a constituent and build champions who we can call on to pass Back from the Brink resolutions and enact policies in support of the 5 policy points. And we aren't just advocating for policy reform, we are bringing communities together, like our tagline says, and building power towards a world free from the threat of nuclear weapons. A big part of that involves building relationships with individuals and organizations, especially those who are new to the issue or whose voices have been excluded from the conversation. We believe it's important to stand in solidarity with other justice movements, and we recognize the interconnectedness of many of the injustices we face. So how are we doing this? At Back from the Brink, we have established 2 systems to support local organizing efforts. The first is our local organizing meetups, monthly gatherings for organizers to get together with fellow activists from around the country and share updates, get advice, ask questions, and learn from each other. The space is geared toward folks who are doing local Back from the Brink organizing in their communities and those who are interested in getting involved in local organizing. We currently meet on the 3rd Tuesday of the month at 1 p.m. Eastern. Oops, excuse me. Many folks who attend these meetups are part of a Back from the Brink hub, our term for our distributed grassroots organizing model. A Back from the Brink hub is any group of three or more people or an existing local organization within a community or region who come together to engage in activities and advocacy within their communities, like the ones I've already mentioned, in support of the Back from the Brink's 5-point policy platform. Hubs receive support, training, and guidance from Back from the Brink's national team. There is a short form to fill out to express your interest in joining or starting a Back from the Brink hub. We also have advocacy tools. Please check out the advocacy tools section on our website, preventnuclearwar.org, for sample endorsement requests, sample resolutions, and more resources that can be helpful in your local organizing efforts. And when in doubt, please email us at info@preventnuclearwar.org. We'd love to hear from you and help you on your way to organizing. Another way to take action is to follow us on social media. If you haven't already done so, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And for anyone who's involved with or interested in social media nuclear weapons advocacy, we welcome both newcomers and seasoned pros to our monthly social media collaboratory gatherings. The goal of this space is to make social media more social. We gather, co-create, strategize, and collaborate, and we build out the social media presence of nuclear weapons abolition related accounts while improving our individual social media skills. We currently meet on the 4th Tuesdays of the month at 1 p.m. Eastern. Another way to take action is to write a letter to the editor, as was described earlier. Writing a letter to the editor to your local or regional newspaper is an effective and easy way to reach a large audience with your message. both the public and your elected officials who keep their eyes on the letters in their local newspapers. And we did the heavy lifting for you. You'll find sample talking points and tips for writing letters to the editor in the list of resources link that I will share. Another way organizations can take action is to endorse the campaign and become a coalition partner. Are you a member of an organization, maybe a nonprofit, faith-based institution, public interest coalition, or for-profit business? The first step to get your organization involved is to endorse Back from the Brink on behalf of your organization, which you can do easily on our website. And if your organization is one of the 400 plus organizations that have already endorsed Back from the Brink, if your organization may be a good fit to level up your involvement and become a coalition partner. Coalition partners take a more active role in supporting our coalition and are a crucial part of our organizing model. And before we transition to the question and answer section, I want to switch gears a bit and just take a quick moment here to acknowledge that nuclear weapons are a manifestation of a deeply unjust system in the US, and worldwide. We believe that achieving true human security demands a commitment to confronting and dismantling longstanding racial, social, environmental, and economic injustices that threaten the lives and well-being of so many people. Nuclear weapons policy is also undemocratic and an extreme example of power consolidation in the hands of a small number of people against all humanity. Back from the Brink believes that working to eliminate nuclear weapons must therefore be part of a large, diverse, intersectional global movement for peace and justice and democracy. That is why we were a mobilizing partner for the Poor People's Campaign Moral March on Washington on June 18th. We wanted to add our voices to this powerful call for a transformation in the country and fundamental shifts in how and where our tax dollars are spent, away from nuclear weapons and towards community needs. And with that, I'll conclude and just invite you to stay in touch with us through the website at preventnuclearwar.org, through email, info@preventnuclearwar.org, Facebook @preventnuclearwar, or on Twitter @backfromthebrink. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. And thank you, Jean. We do have a few questions in the chat, and I encourage you, if you have, if any of the participants have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Our first question is from David. He writes, Biden had been expected to adopt a no first use policy. Do we know why his nuclear posture review failed to do that?
Well, we don't know what his nuclear posture review is because it's classified. It was supposed to have become public in March or April, but it hasn't. So we don't know. But I think it is unlikely that it will have that, because I think that the pressures are great against it. I don't know, Danny, do you have more to say?
Yeah, I mean, I could just add a little bit. When President Biden was campaigning for president, he was campaigning based on the idea that he would support a sole purpose doctrine, which would sort of clarify that the sole purpose of our nuclear arsenal is to deter against nuclear weapons. And in a sense, it sort of clarifies the what and the how of this posture, that it's not to deter against conventional weapons, it's not to deter against biological weapons, it's not to deter against chemical weapons. The sole purpose is to deter against nuclear weapons. This is slightly different than a no first use policy, which is talking about the when. You only use nuclear weapons when nuclear weapons are used against you first, but their practical effect is very similar. But a sole purpose can be formulated in different ways that make it closer or less close to a true no first use doctrine. Now, I think part of the reason President Biden has backed away from a sole purpose doctrine and has adopted the language of a fundamental purpose of nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear weapons, which is the Obama administration position. It's because of a lot of pressure within the military establishment within the United States, and also, I believe, probably in the aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine, many NATO countries that are have security doctrines that rely on nuclear weapons guarantees from the United States are more hesitant to move in the direction of the US adopting a no first use policy. So there are some pressures coming from NATO allies and also within our own military leadership that I think have influenced Biden's decision on that.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks, Danny. Anne asks, where do we get the link for this recording? I'm going to put that in the chat, but you visit sandyspring.org/nuclear. We'll have a link to this recording there, and we'll also have Gene and Danny's PowerPoint presentations available there. Global Citizen asks, how do we prevent the warmongers in America's government from kicking off war with China through a proxy war with Taiwan?
I'm not sure. I think we're all very worried about that, and trying to do what we can to prevent that. Unfortunately, we live in a country that's very militaristic, and that's something that we all have to work to end. But again, one of the problems is the problem of democracy, whereby our members of Congress are basically, most of them, bought and paid for by weapons manufacturers. So it's in their interest, their political, or their the more war there is, the more money they make. So we have to do something about that.
Thanks, Gene. Danny, do you have anything to add on this question?
I mean, I think that's essentially correct. The US government for fiscal year 2023 is on track to spend over $800 billion in military spending for 1 year. And this is actually even more money than was originally requested by the Biden White House. Both the Senate and House versions of the National Defense Authorization Act added additional funding to the military budget request. And I think that's a reflection of the fact of the influence of the lobbyists for arms makers. It's also a reflection of the fact that we have military installations and national laboratories that do work on military matters spread out in congressional districts throughout the country that provide jobs and make it politically difficult for members of Congress to take bold steps to shift American security policy away from arms-based security alone and towards more balanced security that would involve greater investments in diplomacy and development and human security needs that invest in what ordinary people care about, which is housing, healthcare, security in their local community. These are issues that often get left out of the conversation because members of Congress and the White House are not feeling pressure from their constituents to make it a priority. So from my perspective, this is also a question of democracy and democracy fulfilling its potential to have a voice in matters that are traditionally not very accessible to the general public, but it is possible.
Jim, I'd like to say something. This format where you guys are asking questions and Danny and I are trying to answer them, it kind of assumes that he and I are experts. Danny may be an expert. I am not an expert. I'm just somebody who a few years ago, not that many years ago, I got very, very concerned about nuclear weapons. And so I became an advocate. And all of us need to become very concerned and all of us need to become advocates. But I don't really have the answers to the questions that many of you may have any more than you do. You're as much of an expert as I am.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Jean. Stan had a question. What is the status of negotiations with Iran and North Korea?
The last I heard with respect to the Iran nuclear deal, it's in the last stages, and it may or may not, we may or may not enter into it, and it may or may not succeed. I don't know of any ongoing discussions with North Korea. Maybe somebody else has more information than me. I think with the Iran nuclear deal, that is so terrible. Biden, when he was campaigning, he said, yeah, he was going to do this. He could have done it the very first day, and he didn't. There was a lot of political pressure against him, against the US rejoining the Iran nuclear deal from AIPAC and groups like that. And they prevailed. And so it's dragged on and on and on. We could have been back in it much sooner. I mean, we could have been back in it immediately. So it's that is another example of bad politics and bad whatever.
I think there's a glimmer of hope for the JCPOA. The European members of the negotiations have made efforts to bring it closer to a finish line, but there certainly is no guarantee, and it's definitely not. I don't think anybody really knows for sure if it's going to actually happen or not. And I don't believe there are any there's any dialogue taking place between the United States and the North Korean government. And I think everybody has just been watching anxiously, expecting North Korea to conduct nuclear weapons testing sometime this year.
Anne asks, I'd like to explore raising awareness of the issue at our local colleges, asking permission to share an informational presentation to students likely to be open-minded. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea. I mean, nuclear weapons the threat of nuclear weapons didn't go away after the end of the Cold War, but public awareness of the threat did. And it's come back somewhat because of the war in Ukraine and the threats of nuclear war that have been made. But we do have to make efforts continually to reach out to young people on college campuses, and empower them with the knowledge to exercise their voice to the decision makers at every level of government to adopt and support policies that will shift nuclear weapons policy in the United States. Nuclear weapons represent an issue that is constantly going to be need attending to. Because they were built and knowledge to build them exists, the possibility for them being built, even if they're all dismantled, will always exist. So public education aimed at helping people understand why it is in our common interest to eliminate these weapons and keep them eliminated will always be necessary. And and educating our young people in our country and students in college campuses is a powerful way to do that. It's traditionally, I believe, been a powerful driving force for successful social movements. And I think it's really essential for us to figure out how to communicate and engage with these audiences to get them involved in the effort.
I'd like to just add one thing, which is that all of us have a lot of very serious concerns. We're worried about fascism. We're worried about racism, about the environment, about guns, about reproductive health. There are many issues that different people feel very passionate about. But most of these issues, I believe, can be linked in one way or another to nuclear weapons, either because of the absurd amount of money that we're spending on them, or, you know, with respect to racism, there's plenty of evidence that that nuclear weapons have been used, for example, in a highly racist way. So if we can make the connections, we'll have a better chance, I think, of connecting with these other groups and with people who have other issues that are very important for them. And I think, you know, one of the things that we can and should say is that we won't have any of these problems if we have a nuclear war. We won't have any people. And so ideally we would like to get people working on nuclear weapons along with the other issues that they are passionate about.
I would agree with that. And I think the intersectional approach is really valuable. And Jean did a great job in her presentation of talking about the climate impacts of even limited nuclear war. And the converse is true as well. As the effects of the climate crisis advance, it's going to increase the likelihood and risk of nuclear war. For one example, India, Pakistan, and China are all nuclear armed nations, and they all share and compete for access to the same scarce water resources. And as the effects of climate change become more acute, crises over access to water in that part of the world is going to grow and increase the risk of military conflict, and thereby increase the risk of nuclear threats and nuclear war. And if that happens, then as was shared in Jean's presentation, all the wargaming studies show that even a quote unquote limited or tactical nuclear exchange is likely to escalate into full-scale nuclear war, which would be catastrophic. And climate change is an issue that many young people are interested in, and there are ways to tie it very clearly to issues of classism, racism, sexism, and how nuclear production, testing, and use has disproportionately impacted these communities. And there are serious economic trade-offs by investing massive sums of money in weapons that make us less safe and divert funds from other things that young people and all people really care about, whether it be affordable housing, whether it be being able to afford access to healthcare, whether it be education and student loans. These are all things that would be within reach if we had a security environment that wasn't dependent upon these massively dangerous and expensive weapons. And we have a choice to move in a different direction. I think if people are educated about those choices, then we can grow our grassroots base of support towards better choices.
Thanks, Danny. I think we have about 10 minutes left, but Ronnie, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, hi. Thank you. Thank you to both speakers. What is the plan, or is there a plan for getting a Maryland resolution this year, and how can this whole group here help?
I mean, a resolution for the Maryland General Assembly.
Yes, a state resolution, yes.
we've talked briefly about that at Maryland Prevent War meetings, but it hasn't evolved yet to a plan, as far as I know. So, the Maryland General Assembly will meet again in January. Do you know more about that, Danny?
I probably don't know more than you, Jean, because my understanding is also based on what I learned through Prevent Nuclear War Maryland. But I know it has been discussed in the past, and I think there is a desire to see that happen. I think it's just a matter of getting to the point where we can find the right champions and the right number of champions to see it to the finish line. And I think all of our efforts locally in cities and counties in Maryland are going to help that effort and move us closer to realizing it. So I don't see a clear timetable yet, but I think the desire is there, and we would like to see that happen.
Thank you.
Mike, would you like to unmute and ask a question?
Sure. Yeah, we're out here in, excuse me, San Mateo, California. But we did want to tune in to your excellent presentation. And one item, there's always that term low-hanging fruit. And reading several defense analyses, the replacement, what's it called? A reliable replacement nuclear warhead program, which even in the defense establishment's own terminology is basically for the Minuteman III sitting in Nebraska and Iowa, whatever these places are. They have no function. They're calling them nuclear sponge. That was the term. And in other words, they know they could be knocked out on a first strike. And so the idea is, well, if we let them knock those out on a first strike, that the main thrust of our counterstrike would be the submarine launch missiles. And it strikes me as this is a perfect target to say, well, if they have no function and by knocking them out, we end the planet anyway, even before we worry about a second strike, wouldn't it be a smart thing to do to scrap them, plain old scrap it? Because they've had studies done. They said actually getting rid of all the land-based missiles would do nothing to diminish our ability to end the planet anyway. Again, we rely technically on the submarine fleet for the actual destruction of the rest of the planet, if we can't manage it without that. So it just strikes me that might be a target of opportunity for us to say, well, why spend money on something that's going to be a sponge that will probably require the end of humanity even to utilize this sponge? And it just strikes me as a good place to start. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Annette, why don't you go ahead and ask your question, and then we'll take James's question, and then I think we'll wrap up.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to Ronnie's question of how to reach the state delegates and senators. And the Poor People's Campaign, which was mentioned by Danny, has put out a resolution to end poverty in Maryland. And they have many sections about ending poverty: food insecurity, housing, health, criminal justice. They do not mention peace. But if we collaborate with the Maryland Poor People's Campaign, they are saying, get to our candidates for office right now, our state candidates for office, and tell them about these issues. This is one way I think we can promote the issue of nuclear war.
Thanks for that idea, Annette. And James, would you like to unmute and add your comment or question?
Yeah, my comment was that Prevent Nuclear War Maryland is beginning discussion about getting the state legislature to try to adopt a resolution. So I welcome people to join our meetings, and we have a website. I think our meeting information is there, but we have meetings every other Wednesday at 6 p.m. And the next one is Wednesday, the 24th coming up. yeah, please join us on that. And if the link isn't on the website, we can get it to you. I just had another thought on the TPNW. So the idea there is similar to what worked for landmines and cluster bombs that I forget the exact terms, but it's sort of to shame shame the non participants in the treaty, and then to eventually, with increased ratifiers, to get others to join the movement. So that, I don't know if Jean said it in her presentation, I think we're up to 66 countries now. And a lot of the resolutions are back from the Brink are also including the TPNW, endorsement of the TPNW in the resolutions. And we had that in the Frederick resolution that just passed last evening, as Danny mentioned. So those were the things I wanted to mention. Thanks.
Thank you, James. And a special thank you to Danny and Jean for all the work that they put into these presentations and highlighting this very important issue. Again, just a reminder, if you'd like to access the video of this presentation or the PowerPoints, you can visit sandyspring.org/nuclear, and you should be able to access those resources. So again, Danny, Jean, thank you. Ellen, thank you for helping to organize this. And we hope that the conversation will continue.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim and Danny and Jean. Talk with you another time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.